Good evening,
Road
everyone.
trip.
Welcome to this program where for the next few minutes we'll embark on a journey into the supernatural,
Birds.
exploring stories that happen very close to us. Despite some people resisting belief in them, today we'll discuss a variety of topics that will challenge our skepticism and provide perspectives that we may lack. The perspective that we should always leave open the possibility that everything we don't yet understand is possible. Dim the lights and let yourself be carried away. You are now listening to Night Tales. Hello Oriel and hello community. I've been following the channel since its first episode, but only recently joined the group and became more involved in the community. I don't think it was a coincidence that what happened in my parents' house just before I moved out compelled me to share what we had been experiencing. Ever since we lived in the house near the well in San Luis Potosí, the capital on Cuauhtemoc Street, locals here surely know or have heard that the tunnels connecting the churches run beneath that avenue, one of the oldest streets. Back then, it had a water well that was functional until recently. It had never run dry until a few months ago when the drought began in the state. When you approach that well, you feel a chill down your spine, a shiver that we attributed to its depth when we were children. I say attributed because ever since we started hearing noises and voices speaking to us, we stopped thinking it was just that. One quiet day, after lunch and watching TV, I was playing with my brother. At that time, we were 14 and 11 years old, respectively. We heard voices of people talking coming from the courtyard where the well is located. We didn't pay much attention at first, thinking it was my mom having visitors, until we heard a soft voice saying, "Children." So we went down to the courtyard, but there was absolutely no one there. We shouted to our mom asking what was going on, but there was no response. We decided to continue playing and started to climb the stairs. Just as we reached halfway up, we heard the front door open. It was our mom returning from the store with tortillas for lunch. My brother looked at me with horror and asked if I had also heard someone talking to us. I could only confirm that I had, but I suggested maybe it was our neighbor. I didn't want to scare him and ruin our afternoon of play. Little did we know at that moment, it would be the first of many incidents to occur there. Of all these, the one that would instill fear in me about approaching that cursed well happened exactly on March 7th, 2016, the day before my birthday. I was alone in the house. My parents and siblings had gone out of state for a sports competition. Like any teenager, it was the perfect weekend to have the house to myself to enjoy and break in my new TV. I was in the kitchen preparing my food when I heard that damned voice again, saying, "Child, come." This time, I heard it right next to my ear. I was sure there was no one else around at that moment. I simply chose not to listen. I know it might not make sense, but that's what I did. "Come, child." I heard again a few minutes later, but now fainter. Fear began to creep through my entire body. I ignored it, but that would mark the beginning of the most terrifying weekend of my life. I finished eating and started to climb the stairs. Right in the middle of the living room, I saw a black silhouette with its right arm extended. It was motionless and stayed there until I turned fully and it disappeared, but not before hearing "Child, come" once more. I ran to my room like never before, trying to calm down, downplay it, convince myself it was just my imagination. For a few hours, everything remained calm. I even managed to take a nap. However, I couldn't shake that voice from my mind, saying, "Come, child." What ended my nap was hearing someone knocking on my door, but it was done in the distinct pattern my mom always uses, 4 times with a peculiar rhythm. I got up disoriented, thinking they had arrived early and were letting me know, but my parents weren't due back until Tuesday. I stood there staring at the door when I knew with the exact same voice, exactly my mom's voice. "Jacobo, come down, son." I was in shock, unsure of what to do. I grabbed my scapular that I always keep under my pillow and tried to pray, but I couldn't remember the prayers. I couldn't even finish a Hail Mary because I forgot the words. I closed my eyes, thinking it had all passed, when I heard knocking on the door again, but this time it was coming from my parents' room. I got up slowly, alert to see what was happening, but found nothing. I had no idea what was going on. I returned to my room, and as if by magic, I was able to pray again, which brought me some calm. I resumed my activities. Night fell and hunger struck. I walked down the hallway towards the stairs, and just as I started to descend, Again, I heard that voice trying to convince me it was my mom. "Jacobo, come. I'm in the backyard." I didn't know what to do. I looked up at the large skylight, trying to calm myself, when I saw it again, the silhouette with the extended hand. But this time, it didn't disappear. This time, I turned to look directly at it, and it stayed there. Gradually, it took shape, becoming the form of a woman with long hair and very, very long and thin hands. I was frozen, stunned, trying to cry but unable to. It was like being outside of my own body. I could only see her, and she could see me. She didn't move, just stood there watching. When I finally snapped out of it, I looked at my watch and realized 40 minutes had passed, of which I had no memory whatsoever. Felt like only seconds to me. I went downstairs and tried to calm myself. I made myself a tea and a sandwich, trying to distract myself, to perform automatic mechanical movements that would pull me out of the terror trance for a moment. Just a moment. Right when I was about to take a bite of my food, I heard it again. "Music, son." This time, the tone was angrier, as if scolding me, but it still sounded like my mom. I panicked and shouted, "You're not my mom!" There was silence, then I heard laughter. A laughter that still haunts me to this day. I had no idea how to react to that. I prayed again, but I kept hearing, "Jacobo, son." I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't sleep or pretend none of this was happening. I packed my things and called my grandmother, who still lived nearby a couple of streets away. I picked up the phone to ask if I could stay with her for the weekend, but I struggled to remember her number. It's a number I still remember to this day, but at that moment, I couldn't dial it. I gave up, tried to calm myself down, and decided to go without letting her know. I knew that telling my grandmother everything, I would be better off, and as I walked through the hallway to the front door, the house phone started ringing with the ringtone we assigned to my grandmother. Couldn't believe it. I felt like my grandmother knew what was happening, and that's why she was calling. I answered, and my grandmother asked, "Sweetie, everything okay? I heard you dialed, but all I could hear was your breathing. And before I hung up, you said goodbye. Is everything okay? Do you want me to come over?" Just as I was about to reply that everything was fine, I heard it again. "Son, come, smell." But now it wasn't my mother's voice. It was the same voice that had laughed before. I ran, leaving my things behind. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I used my keys, but none of them worked. It was like a different lock altogether. I didn't know what to do. For some reason, I didn't want to go back inside my house. I felt safe there in the hallway. It was as if out there I couldn't feel or I didn't hear anything of what had happened. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I slept. There, I didn't feel the cold, didn't feel anything. I just slept. I thought it was all a dream, a nightmare. I woke to the breeze of the rain, realizing I was still in the hallway. I knew the hell hadn't ended. It was 2 a.m., calmer now after resting a bit. Summoning my courage, I ran through the hallway to reach the backyard. But as soon as I arrived, I froze, stunned. There she was, the woman I had seen by the well, with her arm extended, pointing at me and smiling. A smile visible in the darkness. I saw her lips move, but heard nothing, as if she wanted me to come closer. I didn't want to, but it was as if I had no control over my body. I took a few steps and reached a pillar that supports the ceiling. I don't know how I managed it or how I stopped, but I did. I heard that demonic voice again. "Come down with me." In my mind, I prayed and prayed, and as best as I could, I ran to my room and locked myself in. I knew dawn was approaching, so I stayed there with all the lights on. Finally, dawn arrived, and the rain stopped. I turned off the lights and, with my scapular, went downstairs as if nothing had happened. There were no signs that anyone had been there. I took my keys and my things, but not before noticing that the lock on the cover of that cursed well was missing. The lock my dad always told us not to remove to prevent accidents. I don't know who removed it, if it was me. During those moments of confusion, I didn't know what was happening, whether it was the woman or that voice. Now, community, let's continue with a story we just found on what was formerly Twitter. It struck us as very impactful, and we quickly asked for permission to share it here. It's from a very popular account called The Champion of Humility, who usually doesn't talk about paranormal things but shared this story a while ago. The story took place back in 2014 when the author was in the military. In the description, we will list the authors of this and other stories for tonight. The story describes an encounter with what appeared to be a coyote, but of an enormous size, like something not from this world. That thing had a mouth but made no sound. I only heard my companion, that brave soldier, who once ventured into the mountains searching for crops and drug traffickers, was now pale and crying, unable to use his rifle and so scared that he had wet himself. This is how the story begins. We are in the Sierra de Chilapa. Those who have followed me for years know that my brigade regularly set out from Guerrero to eradicate illicit crops. Before heading up the mountain, a lady approached us to warn us. She asked us to be very careful, as the crops in that area were not ordinary. Not only would we encounter armed resistance, which we were already used to, but those crops were also protected by witches and nawalis. I didn't believe in those things. I wasn't superstitious and didn't want my imagination to run wild. I thought nothing would happen, but a comrade replied very seriously to the lady, "Don't worry, mother, that's why I always carry holy water." The corporal, who was from Tlapa, said that warning was something very serious. One night, after eating animal crackers and drinking coffee, the sergeant and the officer took turns on guard duty. I went to sleep, but around 2 a.m., we started hearing a commotion and gunshots outside. We all rushed out with our weapons ready, thinking that the crop watchers had caught us off guard. Once outside the tents, the lieutenant asked one of the soldiers on guard where the gunshots were coming from. He pointed to a spot among the trees and said that Carranza and Pepino, two of our comrades, were there. So we cautiously headed in that direction. Another burst of gunfire was heard, along with screams, but I swear, they were screams. Indescribable screams of pain made us think that a comrade had been injured. But when we arrived, we found Carranza crying, pale, and soaked in fear. It was as if he had seen something terrifying. We asked him what happened, but he couldn't speak from fear. There was no sign of Pepino, the other comrade. We put alcohol under his nose to wake him up, and when he managed to calm down a bit, he told the lieutenant that the thing wasn't from this world. It looked like a coyote but was larger than a person, didn't have a snout but a mouth, and it laughed, mocking them. He didn't even have time to fire his rifle before the creature vanished into the night at an abnormal speed. Immediately, the lieutenant took half the personnel to search for the missing comrade, and unfortunately, I was among them. I put on my vest and jacket, and we set off. Something that struck me as very odd was, we saw animal tracks, but they were extremely large. Additionally, the broken branches in its path were high and strong. I noticed that the corporal from Tlapa was sprinkling holy water on his magazines and rifle. "What are you doing, Corporal?" I asked. "That thing we're following isn't an animal," he replied. I was terrified, my heart in my throat. It was early morning, and we had no idea what had attacked us. After advancing about 3 kilometers, following the beast's trail, we found the soldiers' G3 near a tree. There were no blood stains or anything to indicate where they had gone. The sergeant found more footprints ahead, human footprints this time. We followed the trail and found the torn jacket of our comrade. At that moment, I wondered what the hell I was doing there. We advanced a couple more minutes when the lieutenant signaled us to stop. He told us to look ahead, and there, about 20 meters away, was that coyote. It was enormous, a beast, and it was tearing our comrade's arm off. That thing saw us and, I swear, it let out a laugh. Corporal Mattis shouted that it was a Nawal, and the lieutenant ordered us to open fire, being careful not to hit our comrade. Trembling, I raised my rifle, but when I aimed, that thing was already somewhere else. It moved too quickly to get a clear shot. However, we had to do something or we would end up like our comrade. We fired cautiously, and finally, that coyote stood on 2 legs and, laughing, began to run through the trees. I don't know if it was luck or the power of God, but at that moment, someone hit it with 2 bullets. It was the corporal from Tlapa, the one who had sprinkled holy water on his weapon. That thing screamed in pain like a person, and as soon as the corporal realized he had injured it, he ran after it. I ran to check on our comrade who... He was lost. He had lost too much blood and was already dead. The lieutenant took me along as an escort to meet up with the corporal while the transport arrived to report the situation. When we reached the corporal, who was watching over the body of that thing, I was shocked. I thought we were going to find the coyote, that beast, but no, what lay there was an old man, nearly 70 years old, with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. I remembered the warning from the old lady, almost hearing her voice cautioning us about the dark creatures that guarded the crops in that area. We had to follow all the procedures required when a comrade is killed. We recorded that the old man had surprised our comrade and dragged him for kilometers during the night. Because, of course, if we said it had been a Nawal, they would call us crazy and probably discharge us. I never believed in Nawalis before that, and even now, I keep telling myself there must be an explanation. But no matter how much I think about it, I can't find one. I can't explain that enormous coyote running on 2 legs or the old man we found dead. We're not done yet, community, so please let us know what you thought of today's stories. I think they were intense, but of course, you always have the final say. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us a lot in growing this community. And don't forget to send in your stories, your family tales, and your experiences, because that's the essence of Relatos de la Noche. We continue with one more story tonight. Last year, I moved to Milpa Alta because I started working in Xochimilco. It was a very good job opportunity, so I didn't hesitate to move, even though I only had a week to do it. I rented a small apartment in... The town of San Juan de Peña is historic and one of the least populated. The apartment had been built on land that used to be a nopal field. The owner mentioned that there were goblins in the area, but that story will be for another time. The construction consisted of 4 apartments sharing a courtyard for parking cars and hanging clothes, situated on a steep slope. I usually came home from work and did my chores, often leaving my clothes hanging overnight to dry. In the mornings, before heading to work, I would collect them. What happened to me occurred one morning when I was going to collect my clothes. That day, I wouldn't be returning to the apartment in the afternoon, so I planned to take the clothes in regardless of whether they had dried. I decided to go out for them at 4:30 in the morning, which is when I usually got up. I remember turning on the light that illuminated my apartment door and stepping into the courtyard with a basket to gather my clothes. I started feeling the clothes to see which ones had dried and which hadn't, to avoid mixing them. Then, I realized I was being watched. I froze, as I was usually the first to get up among my neighbors. It was silent as I turned towards the street gate, and there was a woman, or at least I thought so. She was right at the left corner of the gate, staring fixedly at me from outside. I don't know how she got there, because that street, being a steep slope, always made people's footsteps sound loud. If she had walked there, she had probably been waiting in that position for quite some time, or she had simply appeared. I say I think she was a woman, but to this day I don't remember her features well. Instinctively, I looked towards the small door of the gate, which was always open. If that thing wanted to come in, it was completely possible for it to do so. I thought I had at least a few seconds before it reached me. I turned to my apartment door, which I had left partially open, thinking I could run to try to prevent her from doing anything to me and to get to safety. When I looked back again, that thing started smiling at me. I think it had perfectly understood what I was going to try to do. I stood frozen because that's the only thing I remember about that thing. An utterly exaggerated smile. A smile that didn't seem human mocked how I planned to escape from her. My fear, my attempt to stay safe. That woman seemed to float as she silently slid towards the side door, making no noise with her steps. She remained in the same position for a moment, stopped at the small door, as if waiting to see my reaction. I couldn't run or do anything I had planned. Upon seeing her, I was paralyzed. Her smile widened until it almost occupied her entire face, and then she simply floated away until disappearing up the street. As soon as she was out of sight, I dropped the laundry basket and ran to my apartment. Since then, I dared not go out without sunlight or arrive late, always accompanied. Fortunately, this year I was able to move to another apartment closer to downtown. Although Milpa Alta remains a land of Nawalis and witches, I believe that creature I encountered was one of them. I would like to know if anyone in the area who hears stories knows what I encountered that early morning. the one who smiled at me almost to death out of fear.